this is the list of attendees, right? Okay, I can see a couple of names who are already my students. Good, 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 good.
Yes, good morning, Doctor.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, today our lecture, first of all, I am really delighted to talk about one of my favorite literary figures, one of my favorite literary characters who made a tremendous, a huge, a significant change in the history of English literature, Charles Huffman Dickens. As most of you know, Charles Dickens was born in 1812. That's mean he was born in the 19th century. The 19th century was characterized by a very significant event. It was the age of novel. In the 19th century, so to speak, novel reached its climax. Novel was very, very famous and predominant in the 19th century. 15 years later, later than the date of birth of Charles Dickens, Queen Victoria came to throne. In 1837, Queen Victoria came to rule England. She ascended the throne in 1837, and the entire age was named after her, was named the Victorian age, because Queen Victoria at that time was ruling England. Actually, Britain, not only England, because Britain means England, Wales, and Scotland, in addition to Ireland. So we come back to our hero for today, Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens was one of the literary and controversial figures. By controversial, I mean he is one of those who aroused a good number of discussions, of debates, of arguments among literary critics and reviewers. He was born in 1812 into a very poor family. He was genius, and by genius I mean he did not receive a proper education. He did not receive a proper schooling, yet he was genetically, he was genius, inborn. When he was born, he already was talented person. And by talented, I mean, especially in fiction, by talented, we mean normally a person who has a good range of creativity. His or her mind are capable of creating things out of nothing. As most of you must have read Oliver Twist back in the high school years. So we see, for example, in Oliver Twist, a variety of action, a variety of events that sometimes it is hard for us to believe them, to believe in these things. Normally we don't believe that such things, that such events could actually happen to a normal person, to a normal child, to an average orphan like Oliver Twist. This proves that Charles Dickens enjoyed a sense of creativity that enabled him to create or to compose other significant and very important landmarks in literary fiction, in the British fiction. So, Charles Dickens was not a Londoner. He was not born in London. London as a society differs some way or another from other cities in the United Kingdom. He was born in Portsmouth. Portsmouth is a harbor city. By harbor city, is there any idea what harbor means?
Coastline.
Right, are there? Yeah, yeah. I got that. I got your point. Just give me a second, please, so that I can. Was saying that Charles Dickens was born in Portsmouth, the city. Yes. Yeah. This is the city of Portsmouth, where Charles Dickens was born in the 7th of February, 1812. By the way, Charles Dickens, one of his contemporaries. What's the meaning of contemporary, my friends? Contemporary.
It means, I think, contemporary, مؤقتا.
No, not temporary, not temporary. Contemporary. Contemporary. That's a 3-syllable word.
Yes.
Contemporary, it means that someone who lived, worked, and functioned in the same age, in the same time as yours. بالعربي شو نقول؟ In Arabic, how do we define this word? Example, when we say, for example, our famous poet Al-Farasdaq, he was contemporary of Al-Buhtari. It means that they lived in the same time and worked in the same time, in the same age. They belong to the same age. MOHSER. So one of Dickens' contemporaries was Thackeray. Thackeray is another famous novelist, but unfortunately, he did not receive the same attention as Dickens himself did. So, because of the poor condition, because of the dire condition, dire, D-I-R-E, that means harsh conditions, in which Dickens lived, Dickens and his family, the Dickens, lived, the young Charles had to leave school at an early age. So he unfortunately did not enjoy the proper and formal educations. Yet, by the time he was 20, when he was 20 years old, he managed to write, to compose 15 short stories, 15 short novels by his own. And you can imagine how clever and how talented he was, because at that time, when, for example, when someone whose age is only 20 and yet capable of producing that amount of novels, that amount of stories, it indicates something genius, something intelligent about that person. So, not only that, when he grew up more and more, he managed even to lecture people, to give lectures across the country. He moved from one university to another, from one society to another. By society, I mean جمعية, وليس مجتمع. جمعية. He moved from one organization, from one city to another, in order to give lectures to those people interested in fiction. Fictions, but what's the meaning of fiction, by the way? This is our keyword for today.
Imagination?
Novel.
Yes, kind of imagination. Kind of imagination, but it is kind of imagination that is written on paper. That is written on paper. The main difference between fiction and imagination, the imaginative things that stays in your mind, while fiction is the things that you imagine and you manage, you are able to transfer them into paper. So the actual success, the actual launch of Dickens' literary career started in 1836. In 1836, almost 1 year before Queen Victoria comes to power. So, no, I need to stay in there for a minute. Yes, yeah. We need to admit someone who would like to, yes, admit. Laith, yes. Laith, you are in now. So, I was saying that the actual start, the actual launch of Dickens' literary career was in 1836. That is 1 year before Queen Victoria comes to power. You see that I focus a great deal on the role played by Queen Victoria, because after all, the entire age, the whole age was named after her. And what is so remarkable about her age, about the 19th century, it was the age in which novel, in which fiction flourished. What's the meaning of flourished? Flourished.
Spread.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Spread, especially in a positive sense, in a positive meaning. So, the first novel, the first official novel published for Dickens was the Pickwick Papers. Pickwick Papers. It was an immediate success at that time. It was received widely and publicly by audience and by readership, and because of that, Dickens at that time managed to secure his literary positions among the great literary figures of that time, of the Victorian age. Charles Dickens was also very clever. I mean, by clever, I mean he was thinking, he was managing things in a commercial sense. Yes, Ali Talib Abed Ali, yes, you are in now. He was a very successful businessman also. By businessman, I mean Charles Dickens followed or adopted a kind of publishing manner in which it secures his financial success as well as the literary one. For example, when he wrote the Pickwick Papers, he did not publish the entire novel, the entire story immediately. It was rather divided into sections. It was divided into serials. What's the meaning of serials? For example, when I say serial publication.
Parts.
Yes, in parts. Yes, thank you, Awatif. Yes,
thank you.
It was produced. It was published in parts, in serials, in segments, in portions, in parts. For example, nowadays, when someone, for example, I'll choose myself as an example. For example, when I choose to write a poem or to write a novel or a story, nowadays I write as it is. But back in the, for example, 200 years ago, back in the 19th century, this was not the manner of publication. It entirely depended on serial publication. What is the big idea? What is the main reason that Dickens and his friends, for example, his also a novelist, chose to publish or to write in serial publication. Do you have any idea why?
Maybe get the audience interested. I don't know.
Good. Yes. Yes. This is precisely the reason. Yes, Awatif. In order to arouse the interest, to make people, to make his readers waiting and waiting, just like nowadays مسلسلات. You keep watching and watching and waiting for the next day or the next week in order to see what will be going on in the second serial or in the second episode. For example, nowadays what we call serials or episodes المسلسلات. يعني المسلسلات في هذه الأيام تلاقي نجاح أكثر من الأفلام. لأن طبعا هي اكو literary criteria فد معيار أدبي وضعه تشارلز ديكنز. It says make them wait. When he is addressing one of his students, telling him how to publish or to write a story successfully and how a story will be received successfully. He says to him, he advises that person, he said, make your readers wait, because this is how you arouse their attention, their anxiety, their longing. يعني عامل التشويق راح يكون أكثر. لذلك هو he managed to secure a strong literary positions within the body novel. So then there is something very fascinating and very interesting about Charles Dickens. He was almost the only one who pioneered, who championed this attitude in the Victorian society. He was able to reflect to the authorities, to the government at that time, what was really going on in the Victorian, in the 19th century Victorian society. Is there any idea, is there anyone who could tell me what does this mean?
Do you mean he reflected the poverty and the suffering of the people?
Exactly, yes, Awatif. He, because at that time, the Queen or the King, the Prime Minister, the ministers, the entire cabinet, I mean رئاسة الوزراء, for example. Because, you know, in England, in the United Kingdom, it was the Prime Minister who was almost responsible 100% for the executive duties, الواجبات التنفيذية في الدولة. At that time, the Queen, the Prime Minister did not know what was really going on in the British, in the English slums, S-L-U-M-S. S-L-U-M-S. What's the meaning of slums?
أعتقد الأحياء الفقيرة أو المكانات
Yes. Those districts, those areas who were removed from observation, those areas which were not observed by the authorities, those areas were mostly populated by very poor and degraded people. Most of them were, we call them underwaged workers. Underwaged workers. What's the meaning by underwaged workers? Underwage. دكتورة ممكن شوية بس استعين حضرتك.
يعني يعني المفروض انه ياخذوا يعني جرم كلش قليلة او
يعني تحت خط الفقر يجوز؟
Yes. يعني those people Yes. Yeah, I'll choose it from there. I'll take over. You see, for example, in this picture, you see a group of children in a school age, and unfortunately, they were working in a very terrible in very terrible conditions, which were by no means suitable or healthy enough for boys or for human beings in their age. Yes, because of the poor conditions, because of the poverty that the Dickens suffered, the young Charles had to work in such factories, and he lived in one of the British slums, al-ahya al-faqira, as you said. So actually, what was so noble about Charles Dickens, he was loyal, he was very faithful to the background, to the social background, to the social class from which he came, from which he descended. So when he became famous writer, when he became very popular literary figure, he did not forget the things, the terrible things that were happening to the young people, to the children, to the poor, to the British slums. So he produced and he composed a good number of novels in which he brought the light, in which he focused the light on these people, on this class of people, and the harsh circumstances they were living in. So, for example, Oliver Twist, as most of you have read it or heard about it, Oliver Twist talks about the exploitation, الاستغلال, exploitation that some people were using against the young children. For example, Charles Dickens, ironically and in a very tragic way, reflected to us these terrible conditions in which the young children were living in. When the young, the orphan, the young Oliver asked for more soup. You remember that scene when Oliver had his soup, ate his soup, and he was still hungry, and he went to the chaperone, to the principal, to the director of the school, asking for more soup because he was still hungry. He was strongly rebuked. He was strongly provoked by the director of the school, saying more. He is asking for more, as if he is committing a crime at that time. So this is one of the most memorable scenes in the literary fiction, in the British literary fiction. Everybody, I think, remembers that scene, which actually makes us realize to what extent poor children were exploited and were starving at that time. In addition to that, in addition to, reflecting what was actually going on in the British society in the Victorian and the 19th century, Charles Dickens managed and championed actually what we now called the autobiographical novel. Autobiographical novel. Do you have any idea what autobiography means?
Yes, دكتور. دكتور سيرة ذاتية. سيرة ذاتية. سيرة ذاتية, دكتور.
Actually, more than a CV, actually.
Yes, exactly. When you write your resume, your CV, your own CV, in a form of either poem or novel or even drama, you are writing, in this case, you are writing your autobiography. So, do you remember what was the title of the novel which Charles Dickens composed, in which he tells us about his own personal life, the autobiography, his autobiography? Can you name the novel?
No, I don't.
What about the others? I mean, Charles Dickens wrote a very significant autobiographical novel in which he tells his reader about his own experience as a suffering child. It starts with D. It's David Copperfield. It's David yes, David Copperfield. I strongly urge you to go back to the YouTube channels, for example, and watch this interesting movie. Its name is David Copperfield. David Copperfield.
C-O-O-P, Copperfield?
Yes, C-O-P-P-E-R-F-I-E-L-D. David Copperfield. That's the name of the hero, the name of the main character in the novel. David Copperfield is the imaginary Charles Dickens, but he uses another name. It tells exactly the same story, the same actual personal story that happened to young Charles Dickens when he was poor. I mean, when he was poor, because later Charles Dickens made a huge success, and he was very popular and successful writer, critic, journalist, essayist, and because of that, he made a huge fortune. He became a very wealthy person because of that. And he moved to London later on and lived in a very exotic street, in a very fashionable street in the middle of London. And he bought a huge mansion or house. Mansion, for big houses, in English they call them mansion. M-A-N-S-I-O-N. That is a big house, especially big house used by rich people.
Same palace, Doctor?
Sorry?
Same palace?
And it's not palace. It's smaller than palace actually.
A villa maybe.
يعني استاذ سعد لا تسمعني عزيزي. احنا يعني اقرب ما يكون الاخوان المصريين يصيحوا له فيلا. فيلا هو حتى بالانجليزي يقال الى فيلا. يعني بيت تشارلز ديكنز موجود حقيقه في لندن، وهو متحف حاليا لكل موجوداته ولكل اثاثه. Even the pen, the desk, his bed, his clothes, his nightwear, his sleepwear, everything he was using when he lived in that house. It's by the way, it's four floor house. يعني بيت كبير مكون من 4 طبقات، من بيت جميل جدا. حتى لو تشوفوه بالجوجل هو موجود. يعني ان شاء الله حتنزل لكم الرابط اللي بيه الصور مال بيت تشارلز ديكنز.
العفو دكتور، اكيد يعكس. العفو دكتور، اكيد يعكس نظرتك كفنان حتى بهاي الجزء.
طبعا يعني مثلا الدايننج روم، يعني الدايننج روم هي غرفه الطعام اللي عنده. وصل من الثراء تشارلز ديكنز انه كان من يعزم النقاد ومن يعزم زملائه الفنانين والزملاء الروائيين والشعراء. طبعا هو اصبح عنده صالون ادبي اشبه بصالون روز اليوسف احنا عندنا في لبنان. صار عنده صالون ادبي، فاصبح هو ثري جدا لدرجه انه مثلا من يعزم استاذ سعد حاط له الماعون والكاسه وصوره سعد على الماعون والكاسه. من يعزم مثلا ويليام ميكبيس ثاكري هو هذا طبعا واحد من المعاصرين الكونتمبراريز مالته. He's another famous novelist. لكن انتم ما تاخذوا للاسف الدراسات الاوليه، بالدراسات الاوليه هذا ثكري هم انا كان شخصيه مشهوره، فكان يجي يلقى الكرسي المخصص له امامه الصحن مالته وامامه الكاسه مالته مطبوع عليها صورته، فلذلك لحد الان موجوده.
ايش قد الستايل، العفو الدكتور، ايش قد الستايل ماله سابق عصره
طبعا.
نعم.
يعني تشارلز ديكنز اثبت نظريه انه الذكاء لا تعطي الشهاده، الموهبه لا تمنح عن طريق شهاده. طبعا هو شكسبير من الشخصيات المشهوره في الادب الانجليزي، ذولا يعني those figures did not receive any proper education, did not receive any formal education. I mean, for example, they did not get degrees from Cambridge, from Oxford, yet they were very smart, very talented, and they even well-known universities. بعدين يا شباب إن شاء الله طبعا at the peak of Charles Dickens success and fame, he wrote another novel which also marks his progress, his unstoppable progress in the literary field. It was a Christmas Carol, a Christmas Carol. يعني tiny song. احنا فتيتي song يعني شو الصح لها ترنيمة. ترنيمة. Thank you دكتور فاطمة. ترنيمة عيد الميلاد. A Christmas Carol. يعني this novel even nowadays it remains very popular and narrated from one generation to another, especially during the festive seasons, during the Christmas seasons, the Christmas holidays. Charles Dickens, the success he made, actually someone wants to join. Yes. Go. This one. All right, this one. Yes. مشتاق غالب. Yes. Okay. As I said, I was saying that Charles Dickens was so well known and popular, especially by the middle of the 19th century, that his stories and his novels was narrated to families in the literary gatherings and celebrations, for example, before going to bed. Even his novels, his stories were so popular, so fascinating, and so interesting that people at that time, he was very, very, very famous. Can dare say that he equals nowadays television at that time, and he became day by day, he became an entertainer. What's the meaning of entertainer?
Amusing.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, entertainer. By entertainer, I mean someone who conveys, who transmits entertaining, amusement to other people. At that time, enjoyed Dickens stories. They enjoyed listening to Dickens novels being narrated by, for example, a father, grandfather, even a mother. At that time, normally the British families were huge ones, very, very, very big families. And at that time, it is very common and very normal for an average British family to have 10 or even 12 children, with the mother as a housewife, and the father as a dominant figure. يعني أشبه ما يكون بمجتمعاتنا الشرقية، أنه الأم هي ربة بيت والأب هو العنصر الذكوري المهيمن على هذا المنزل، والذي يسمح له بالخروج خارج المنزل والعمل والإنفاق على هذه العائلة. So when a Victorian father returns home, okay, normally in the afternoon or even in the evening, he gathers his family, his children, his daughters, his sons, including his wife. So, and he chooses one of Dickens novels and one of Dickens stories to tell to his children. And one of the reasons why Dickens was so popular and was so appealing to people is all ages liked what Dickens wrote. So you see, for example, children, teenagers, women, men, elderly people all enjoyed listening to Charles Dickens' stories, because at that time it was derived from the core, from the center of the Victorian society. And he actually told the stories, imaginative stories, that although they are imaginative, but they are very likely to happen to actual people. I remember I read somewhere that, for example, Queen Victoria was surrounded by advisors, يعني مستشارين. كان عند الملكة فيكتوريا a group of advisors, and they strongly advised her not to read, for example, Oliver Twist, not to read David Copperfield, because it tells terrible things about what was actually going on in the British society during the rise of the Industrial Revolution. At that time, the British society had so many ailments, so many problems, and normally the Queen's advisors did not tell the Queen about what was actually going on in actual life. They preferred that the Queen and her family remains away, remains ignorant of what is going on in the society, because they believed that would disturb the mood of the Queen, which is something not true, because a ruler, queen or king, prime minister, should come down to the street, should leave their ivory towers in order to mix with people, with poor people, in order to understand, to estimate, to see what they are suffering from. But that was not the case with the Queen Victoria and her family. And from this point, we realize the significance, the important role of Charles Dickens, because he was the one responsible for bringing the attention, the royal attention, to those people who were starving, who were suffering because of poverty, because of hunger, because of ill treatment, because of the terrible work conditions at that time. This is one of the reasons that made Charles Dickens a popular literary character within the body of the Victorian fiction, of the Victorian society. So, nowadays, actually, in literary criticism, في النقد الأدبي عادة, يعني especially English literary criticism, we use the word Dickensian. it is a term derived from the name Dickens. This term used to describe something that recalls Dickens' works, that recalls his literary career. And also, when we use the word Dickensian, we mean that anything that brings attention to the social conditions, to the terrible social conditions, to the working classes, or even to those landlords or factory owners who were exploiting children. As I said, he lived and he was born in Portsmouth, and his early career, his early life was not an easy one. He had to work as in a shoe shining factory. What's the meaning of shoe shining factory? It's a shoe paint factory, actually. What's the meaning of shoe paint factory?
عفوا دكتور، مصنع الأحذية أو تجميع الأحذية أو ما شابه مصنع الأحذية.
نعم هو مو مصنع، هو بصراحة it's not a factory that makes shoes. It's a factory that makes the paint for shoes.
exactly.
يعني صباغ الأحذية.
صباغة نعم بالضبط.
Yes, يعني الصبغ مع الأحذية. And
نعم.
Charles Dickens' job was to label or to stick the labels on the paint cans. يعني كان هو وظيفته بالتحديد، هو طفل طبعا، طفل لم يتجاوز 11 عاما أو 10 أعوام. كانت وظيفته هو يعني لصق الملصقات على هاي الأواني مال الصبغ المكتوب عليها إنه هذا الصبغ أحذية. يعني you can imagine how terrible it was. And most of the time he comes home with paint all over his body, all over his clothes, and he was like his other fellow children, طبعا underwaged. They were not paid very evenly or very fairly. يعني those يعني employers مالتهم did not pay them what they actually deserve. Not to mention that they were working in terrible conditions and in a school age which was not suitable for work, especially in factories. What else? Let me check if there is anything fascinating about Charles Dickens. Day by day, Charles Dickens was progressing very fast and very successfully in his literary career. And he managed to attract people, big names in literature, in media, in journalism. They were gathered around him in his house, as I said, and because of his inborn genius, they were listening very passionately, very eagerly to everything he was saying at that time. I remember there was another contemporary novelist of Charles Dickens. Her name was George Eliot. At that time, as I remember once said, at that time, women at that time and especially during the 19th century, were not allowed actually to use their actual names. They were hiding they were hiding behind men's name, because when if a woman decides, right? This one, yeah. Because at that time, when a woman chooses to write or a novel, for example, or to compose a poem, nobody would be interested to read for her. Nobody would dare or would prefer to choose a woman's literary outcomes. So at that time, if a woman wants to live by her pen, to become a literary figure at that time, she was obliged, she was forced to use a man's name. So Mary Ann Evans had to use a man's name, and she renamed herself as George Eliot, and she remained unknown to readers. I mean, her readers mistook her for a man. They believed that they were reading the works written by a man. It's only Charles Dickens who found out that these novels must have been written and must have been composed by a woman, because everything in it refers to woman, and the passion and the sensation and the language used in George Eliot's novels only suitable for women. And Charles Dickens was very clever, was very talented to realize that George Eliot is not a man, George Eliot is a woman, and he wrote to her, and she trusted him and revealed her own actual, real identity to him. And he was he made actually an excellent advisor for her, and he kept her secret till her death and never revealed her actual identity. Also, another thing so significant about Charles Dickens, he was creating a model citizen. He was creating what we nowadays call an everyman. طبعا بالمناسبة يا شباب كلمة everyman with capital E بالأدب عادة بالأدب الإنجليزي بالتحديد is used to indicate a model person, an average person who could reflect the ideas, the common sense of people. So as we, for example, we see in Dickens' novel Great Expectations. In Great Expectations, Charles Dickens introduces to us Pip, P-I-P, the main character. He is, in nowadays terminology, we call him an average everyman, an average person who reflects the collective identity, the collective mood of the society. For example, we see Pip revolting, rebels against all the circumstances he was living in. And he refused to be dependent on his sister. And he refused to stay as a country boy. country boy يعني بيب رفض أن يبقى فتى ريفي متواضع. He refused to do that. And he decided to migrate to a more complicated society like that of London. And there he managed to make fortune and to become an aristocratic and wealthy person with dignified status. and he returns home someone else. So Dickens believed strongly in the social transformation. يعني Dickens آمن بالتحول الاجتماعي, and he told us not to be satisfied with our moderate status, our moderate social class. He invited us to revolt against the social conditions. Anything that drags us down, and he called us to be another Charles Dickens, because he serves in this case as a good model for us. He came actually from very moderate social class and kept mounting till he became a very popular and very rich person, a very successful businessman, and he broke the borders, social borders of the British society, and managed to be someone more attractive, more successful than the average life he was leading. Also, as you can see in this picture, I hope everyone can see it now. This is a very common London street, and you can see, for example, the fashion, the costumes people used to wear at that time, and you see a couple of ladies standing by chatting, and this was a privilege given only to rich people, to rich women, not any woman. As you can see, this is the front page of Dickens' A Christmas Carol, which was one of the landmarks that were responsible for Dickens' popularity and fame, and it was very widely quoted by people at that time. I mean, so many lines were quoted and transferred and spreaded in the British society. And here we have also Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, which he produced in 1859, in which he compares London to Paris, because at that time Paris was what we now call a literary and cultural powerhouse at that time. Paris was kind of landmarks in culture and literature, and every city and every people was dreaming of living in Paris because of the literary and cultural things that Paris enjoyed at that time. So Dickens was brave enough to write A Tale of Two Cities, in which he compares London to the city of Paris. I mean, at that time, that particular novel aroused the anger of the government, and it was strongly objected by the British. Historically speaking, you know, France at that time was a republic and ruled by the Napoleon dynasty, the Napoleon families, and the British were royals and very conservatives, and they were very afraid that the Republican ideas could be transported into England and people begin to think of revolting against the authorities. So anything from France was looked at with anger, was looked at with actually was opposition by the government because of the Republican tendency at the time. So Dickens preferred to write very bravely, I mean, and very rebelliously about Paris, and also it contributed. I mean, A Tale of Two Cities. It contributed to his fame and to his popularity. And now I think I have time to open the floor for questions. Is there any questions going on in your minds?
May I
Of course, yes, of course.
Dickens express about black point of view toward the war, and we can see in his novel Hard Time. Yes, please, Doctor, refer to the effect of this novel, because she related with the change of the society and the circumstances, and this novel, I think it is very complex, and it deals with many things. I want Doctor to refer something about it.
Thank you, Saad, for this interesting questions. Actually, I forgot to mention that especially during the 19th century, England, the United Kingdom actually was living at that time in an age of expansion in every aspect of life. At that time, Britain managed to rule over 3/4 of the entire area of the earth. At that time, Britain had so many colonies across the world, around the world. So this leads to the fact that Britain at that time was also engaged in a huge number of military conflicts with other empires, with other nations. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I was saying Britain at that time was engaged and had to be engaged with military conflicts, with military war, with other nations, with other empires, including the French, the German, the Austrians, the Russians, the Ottomans, also the Spanish. At that time, Charles Dickens was actually reacting to these quick and rapid changes of the British foreign policy abroad. And he chose to write about, to reject, actually, to criticize the British expansion at the cost of other nations. For example, in Hard Times, as you said, Saad, he actually was brave enough, was courageous enough to criticize the government action towards other nations. For example, he was rejecting and criticizing, first of all, the educational system. Internally speaking, he was rejecting and criticizing and attacking the educational system. And he starts his novel Hard Times with, I'm going to quote from him, facts. Teach those young children nothing but facts. He was actually criticizing. he was making fun. He was using irony against the educational system at that time, because he accused the British educational system of being very dry and teaching young children very dry information and filling their minds with things that do not actually contribute to make children, especially in school age, flourish again and be successful persons in life. We must avoid teaching them only facts. We must teach them something else. So he suggested that, for example, we must teach those people democracy, human rights, how to demand their own rights, how to be successful leaders at that time. So when he chose the title Hard Times, because he deeply thought and he was deeply sensing the hard times, the actual hard times that people at that time were living in. So he criticized internally the educational system, as I said, and then he moved to criticize the government policy, especially the foreign policy, because he said at that time, we must not colonize other nations, especially nations in Africa or in India, and we must stop تجارة العبيد, trafficking people, الإتجار بالبشر at that time. All these was collected in one book, and he called these things as hard times. We see that from this point we can describe Charles Dickens as a social reformer and also political reformer, in fact, because he was one of those very few figures who was brave enough to tell the government at that time, no, you are on the wrong positions. You are doing terrible things happening to other nations. We must not do these terrible things to other people and other nations. We must not commit injustice. يعني يجب أن لا نمارس الظلم towards other people. And he wanted, actually, Charles Dickens wanted to attract the attention, the public attention, يعني الرأي العام living in during the British expansion abroad. Yes, Saad. Yes, please.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Anything else?
Doctor,
we have very impressive attendance today.
Another questions or?
Of course, yes. Yeah, you may.
Doctor, could you refer to a comic work of Charles Dickens?
Yeah, actually, Charles Dickens was kind of adopting a Shakespearean style. I remember once saying that Shakespeare was very unique in his styles. And by unique, I mean he was mixing tragedy with comedy, comedy with tragedy, and vice versa. So Dickens also preferred to use this style. For example, in Oliver Twist, in David Copperfield, although these are tragedies, but they are narrated in such a melodrama. Have you ever heard of melodrama? Melodrama. That is MELODRAMA. One word. Melodrama. MELO and drama. Do you have any idea what melodrama is?
I think melodrama.
If not, let me explain it to you. Melodrama, when someone writes a literary work which is hardly believable by readers. I mean, some people would find it very hard for them to understand or to believe the things and the characters in this novel. For example, Charles Dickens was accused of being very, very melodramatic. In Oliver Twist, for example, many of Charles Dickens' critics accused him of being melodramatic in such a way that they said, for example, it is very hard for us to believe that Oliver does exist in actual life. We do not believe that people like Oliver Twist, like David Copperfield, like Pip, like all these characters, like Stella, like Miss Havisham, all these characters, we don't believe they normally or they actually exist in actual life. So Dickens' style was very, very melodramatic. And he imported, actually, he created these characters on purpose, deliberately, in order to attract the social or the political attention of the government at that time. So one of the key things that he used, that he employed actually in his style, is to mix tragedy with comedy, comedy with the tragedy, because after all, Charles Dickens was after business, was after making profits, was after making money. So if he entirely decides, or his style is exclusively tragic or exclusively comic, I mean, his readership will decrease tremendously, very significantly. As I said a while ago, Charles Dickens was a businessman as well. By businessman, I mean he was trying to make money. And he tested the water. He tested the public taste, يعني الذوق العام. And he chose the best common grounds that everybody agreed on it, that almost everybody liked. And he chose to go that way, the way that makes money for him. So the style of mixing tragedy with comedy, comedy with tragedy, and using melodrama was the key factors that led to his success. And by the way, before I forget, one of the key things that Dickens employed in his novels is to choose strange and bizarre names. Strange and bizarre names. Like, for example, Mr. McWhorter. This is not a common name in Britain. Maybe it's only Dickens who named him as a Mr. McWhorter. But there is no such name in England or even in the Western civilizations. It is typically Dickens names.
Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome, Saad. You're welcome. Anything else?
I think very important to know about this person, Charles Dickens, after your lecture.
Please try to familiarize yourselves with movies. There are huge, actually, numbers of movies, especially on YouTube channels. And I would strongly advise you to choose the BBC version of Dickens movies, because in the BBC versions, first of all, is academic and entertaining, and also they use very pure British English. It is the English actually that we normally do not speak nowadays. It is 19th century English, but it is still fascinating. It is still a beautiful language, and also, and by the way, Dickens' works give you this is something really special and unique about Dickens. Dickens' works and novel give you a panoramic view, a bird's eye view about the British society, how they lived, how they ate, for example, how they married, how they were communicating with each other, how they were seeing the different classes of society at that time. Because at that time, I mean a time where and when the Industrial Revolution just broke out and everything was turning from totally agricultural society to industrial one. So Dickens was living and working right at the center of this transformation from agriculture to industry.
And his history, his life history, I think
Sir,
yes,
yes, sir.
it's
So as a good example, yeah,
a source of creativity.
exactly. Yes, he lived such a terrible and harsh. He had a terrible and harsh life actually, and he instead of despairing, instead of sitting motionless, يعني بدل أن يشعر بالإحباط والقنوط بسبب الوضع المأساوي الذي كان يعيشه, he decided to do something else. His reaction was to transfer these terrible circumstances into something fruitful, into something productive, and he achieved what he wanted. He used in order to make a literary empire that we call his own. We call it nowadays a Dickens Empire. He became a very popular writer, a very successful businessman, and he is memorized for lifetime. And he managed to secure his place and his positions among the most prominent, the most famous literary figures of the 19th century. Even nowadays, we still enjoy reading Dickens. We still, we still enjoy watching Dickens, listening to everything he said. And we see that day by day, even nowadays, that the very same terrible circumstances and harsh conditions are being repeated every day. So it proves that Dickens was right all the time.
Doctor,
Yes,
as we show how famous this writer. He says, I am writing because I can't stop.
Because I can't what? Sorry, Saad? Stop. Yes, he was unstoppable. Yes, his creativity, and he proved also, Saad, what is really strange and fascinating about Dickens. He proved to others, even he proved to us, that academic degree is not a necessary requirement for success. If you are intelligent enough, if you are genius enough, you don't need education. You don't need an academic degree. You don't have to go to college or to university. And the history gave us Shakespeare and Dickens as an excellent examples of this.
Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Saad.
Yes.
All the best.
Yes. I am your student.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, Saad, you are.
May I, Doctor?
Yeah, of course.
Well, I have an interest of his population policy. Did he continue to publish his work partially, or at a certain point he published them in whole?
No.
Did-
No.
in one time, not partially, just for that.
Yes, because nowadays you read an entire volume of Dickens. For example, nowadays when you come, for example, to Great Expectation, you read it as a whole, as one continuous story. But at that time, in the 19th century, it was published into parts, into serials. And by the time, for example, when Dickens published the first serial, the first part of the story, he did that on purpose. He did that deliberately, يعني عن عمد, because by the time people were enjoying reading the first part, he was busy doing and writing the second one. And
this is the point.
Yes, this is the point. And he was actually, when he, for example, publishes the first part, he was testing the water. He was testing the public opinion, the public reaction to his story. If it is good, if it is good reaction to it, he continues producing the other parts. If not, he makes certain adjustments. He makes certain changes to the following parts in order to finally produce one good work that is received very well by his readers.
Yes, thank you, Doctor. That's very intelligent of him.
And by the way, he was very careful not to disturb his readers, not to annoy them, because he strongly depended on his readers' reception of his works. Otherwise, nobody would be interested in reading his novels.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome. And by the way, he was a literary critic as well. And he was what we call nowadays columnist. What is the meaning of columnist? That is CULUMNIST, columnist.
We will Google it.
Yeah, you may, of course. Yeah, columnist. CULUMNIST.
من مناهج؟
No. columnist mean يعني بصراحة احنا باللغة العربية من الصعب إيجاد معنى لها، لكن هو صحفي أو مو شرط صحفي، كاتب يكتب في عمود معين في جريدة. يكتب في
that's from column.
Yes, column
عمود. Yes.
columnist هو شخص يكتب في عمود معين في جزء معين في جريدة، وخصوصا هذا مثلا احنا كنا في مجلة، الا تذكروها، مجلة الفاء. عادة كلمة المحرر او اكو صحفي معين في عالمنا العربي، يعني طيب الذكر محمد حسنين هيكل الله يرحمه، كان كولمنست، هو صحفي وكان يكتب في في جريدة الأهرام، وكان يكتب في مجلة آخر ساعة، له عمود خاص به مع كل إصدار يكتب به يعني وجهة نظره بالسياسة، وجهة نظره بالإعلام.
دكتور بالنسبة لتشارلز ديكنز كان يكتب باسم مستعار مو باسم بوز.
نعم احسنت. نعم فاتتني هاي المعلومه فعلا.
خاصة هاي الكوميك البلاي او نعم.
written by Boz.
نعم.
In which paper?
All of his works were published under the name of Boz. B-O-Z.
Yes.
B-O-Z. Boz. يعني هو هذا يصح له pen name عادة. يعني شلون احنا مثلا كان فالصحفي والله ما يحضرني اسمه عزيزي عزوز مثلا يكتب هاي او جريدة حبسبوز. هاي اسماء شهرة، اسماء اعلامية. هو الغاية من عندها، الغاية الرئيسية من عندها هو لجذب الانتباه او التخفي خلف
او دكتور لربما ينقل فد وجهة نظر يعني شوية صعبة او ينتقد فيكون تحت اسم مستعار يعني.
تثير حفيظة الحكومة. السلطات دائما السلطات يعني تثار حفيظتها يعني against anything written or that criticizes the authorities. ديكنز طبعا كان هو social reformer and political advisor. كان يعني هو مصلح اجتماعي وكان مستشار سياسي. ورغم انه هو يعني هنا هاي يعني الشغله fascinating about him. As I said, he did not get any formal education. يعني البريتش سوسايتي كلش prejudice، كلش بايس، يعني كلش ينحاز. يعني مثلا الناس، انا متاكد من هاي المعلومه، في ذلك الوقت لو تشارلز ديكنز كتب بشخصيته الحقيقيه وباسمه الحقيقي ما حد يقرا له، لان كانوا في ذلك الوقت الفقراء لا يعير لهم احد اهميه. اولا تشارلز ديكنز he came from very يعني poor backgrounds. He is poor, and even as I said once that his father was sent to prison because he was deeply in debt. يعني وكان غارق في الديون ابوه. وطبعا يعني من سخريات القدر انه في ذلك الوقت اكو سجن يعني يسمى debtors prisons. كلمه debtors DEBTORS. yes موجوده. yes this one. debtors prison. Something tragic about this prison is when someone is sent to this prison because of he's or she's indebted to people. He may take his family to this prison with him. So, sorry. The young Charles Dickens, when he was a child, he frequented that prison. He lived literally in that prison with his dad. So he was in close contact with the prison conditions, with the terrible treatment that prisoners were receiving at that time.
دكتور العفو دكتور. I think as a conclusion that Charles Dickens considered as encyclopedia of literary work.
That's a big name actually. That's a very big definition. احنا عندنا يعني لكل شخصيه ادبيه pros and cons، يعني negative and positive points. ديكنز طبعا يعني تؤخذ عليه مؤاخذات كثيره، يعني مثل ما قلت هو كان very melodramatic. يعني at that time طبعا بالمناسبة في ذلك الوقت مجرد أن قراءه هم من الطبقة الفقيرة ومن الطبقة الوسطى هذه تهمة بحد ذاتها. يعني at that time if you want to succeed in literary life, in a literary career, you must write for the elite, for those aristocratic people, because those will support you, those will reward you with money, with fame, with popularity. But after all, Dickens was writing for the poor, for the middle classes. for the working classes. This is number one. And number two, as I said, he did not receive any proper and formal education, and the British society at that time were normally against those people who were illiterate، يعني أميين يعني بمعنى الكلمة. طبعا كلمة أمي هم مو معناه اللي ما يقرأ ويكتب، هو ديكنز كان يقرأ ويكتب لكن بدون شهادة يعتبر أمي. فكان له سبب طبعا مبرر انه يتخفى حول البن نيم بوز، لان على مود لا حد يعرفه. هاي رقم واحد. رقم اثنين، هو ميلو دراماتيك مثل ما قلت. ميلو دراماتيك يعني هي it's very hard for us to believe in. يعني هاي الكاركترز اللي كان من الصعب ان نجدها على ارض الواقع. يعني ما يجوز هسه احنا في عصرنا الحالي يعني او يعني modern days we find many orphans, we find many desperate people, we find many people underwaged. All these things are still happening. لكن في ذلك الوقت ما حد ما كان يصدق انه اكو واحد مثل ديفيد كوبرفيلد. ما كان احد يصدق، رغم انه هو ديفيد كوبرفيلد شخصيه حقيقيه اللي هو تشارلز ديكنز نفسه. تشارلز ديكنز الطفل طبعا اوتوبايوغرافي. ما كان احد يصدق انه بيب، يعني احنا الكل لاحظتوها من درسنا Great Expectations، يعني بيب when يعني receives a fortune, receives a huge amount of money from an unidentified person. يعني هل من المعقول نصدق حتى في يومنا هذا انه شخص قاعد حاط رجل على رجل على غفله واحد يدق الباب عليه يقول له يا بجتك هاي الثروه تفضل تعال استلمها؟ هذا الشيء ما لا يصدق. فلذلك طبعا يعني اكو نيجاتيف بوينتس اجينست تشارلز.
دكتور بس عموما عموما هاي عبقريه مالته غطت على ذني يقول عليها العيوب.
طبعا هو بوبيلر، يعني هسه انت تلاحظ النقيض مالته رغم انه هو صديقه المقرب. اكو شخص اسمه ويليام ميك بيس ثاكيراي that is THACKERAY ثاكيراي. هو صديقه المقرب وحتى يعني تقريبا نفس العمر، يعني ديكنز 1812 وثاكيراي 1811، هم تقريبا نفس العمر وعملوا في نفس الساحه واثنيناتهم روائيين مشهورين. لكن ثاكيراي كان ريالست، يعني ريالست واقعي. معظم الشخصيات اللي كتب عنها شخصيات مستمده من الواقع ويمكن ان يصدقها القارئ. يعني مثل اذا قرأت توماس هاردي كان متشائما بحذر، كان متشائم بواقعيه، احسن مما يقول اضحك على القراء مالتي واصور لهم حياه هي غير صحيحه. فكان ديكنز يحاول ان يرسم لنا شخصيات هو وجهه نظره، يعني هو هذا الاتيتيود مالته، هو هذا البوليسي مالته. كان يتصور by presenting fictional characters، يعني شخصيات تخيليه. by presenting fictional characters he was trying to attract the attention of his reader, to even arouse the thrill or anxiety of his readers. هو نجح، طبعا نجح لأن في ذلك الوقت طبعا في كل زمان الريدرز يحبون فد كاتب ينتشلهم من الواقع اللي هم عايشين به، يحاول يصور لهم فد بطل مثالي يفوت في ظروف صعبة لكن ينجو منها. هم كانوا ما ينجون بالحقيقة، يعني كان الناس مثلا الظروف الصحية كانت very terrible، يعني ال health conditions at that time well health services provided by the authorities were very terrible. واحنا شفنا انه شخصية رائعة مثل إيميلي برونتي died because of this، يعني died because of years old when she died very untimely، يعني ماتت بعمر يعني مو بوقتها ماتت. الناس كانوا يعني يكرهون هاي الظروف، فكانوا يحبون الشخص اللي يجمل لهم هاي الظروف، اللي يصور لهم اكو فد واحد سوبر هيرو انه يمكن ان يمر بهذه الظروف ويخرج منها ناجيا ومنتصرا. فكان تشارلز ديكنز their man. هو
يعني
كان
ايديز دكتور جماعه الايديزم
ايدياليزم. اي هو تقريبا ايدياليزم. يعني هو كان بالمناسبه اكو هذا البويتيك جاستس. استاذ سعد سامعين بها البويتيك جاستس؟ اعتقد غطيناها في واحده من محاضراتنا.
نعم.
the good people are rewarded والbad people are punished. مو دائما هاي بالافلام، خصوصا الافلام المسلسلات المدبلجه التركيه المكسيكيه الافلام الهنديه، دائما الاشرار يعاقبون والاخيار ينتصرون. ابدا هذا مو صحيح. كثير من المواقف في الحياه نجد ان الاشرار هم من ينتصرون والاخيار بالعكس يذهبون الى غيابه الجب والى زوايا النسيان. فكان تشارلز ديكنز ابدا ضد هاي المبدا. كان يقول دائما ان البويتيك جاستس will prevail، يعني هي اللي راح تنتصر. العداله في نظره انه الجود بيبل ريوردد والباد بيبل بانشد. واحد مثل توماس هاردي، واحد مثل ثاكري قالوا لا ماكو شيء حكي، احنا يعني كثير من المواقف في الحياه نرى ان الاشرار هم من يحكمون، الاشرار هم من يسودون، هم من ينتصرون. الناس ما تريد واحد يواجهها بالحقيقه، يحبون واحد مثل ديكنز صح ياخذهم الى اعماق التجربه، يعني ياخذهم to the depth of the terrible experience, but they want someone who shows them that after all this suffering, after all these terrible experiences, you walk out victorious, you walk out triumphant، يعني تخرج متغلب على هاي المصاعب. كانوا يحبون هذا الشيء يعني حتى لحد الان انا واحد من الناس اذا البطل يعني ينتصر وقوى الشر تتغلب عليه انا انزعج من هذا المسلسل او انزعج من هذا الفيلم.
دكتور لان هاي تحقق البيتي انفير يعني ننساها.
طبعا الكاثارسيس انت يعني with negative energy inside you when you watch that those good people are rewarded. هذا كل النيجاتيف انرجي، كل البيتي اند فير inside you you will manage to get rid of. يعني هاي كلها راح انت تتخلص من عندها يعني. بس اذا انت لا عن الاكسبكتيشنز the great expectations in your mind are not achieved, this is the problem. فلذلك طبعا يعني هو اكو نواحي تسويقيه استاذ سعد هم يعني لا تتصور انه مثلا تشارلز ديكنز كان يعمل بمثاليه وكان يعمل بنزاهه مطلقه. يعني هو كان يتحسس الذوق العام وبناء على مقتضيات الذوق العام هو يكتب، حتى وان خالف معايير الادبيه، حتى وان خالف اراءه الشخصيه.
دكتور حتى التسويق العفو للروايات يراد لها اشياء جماليه واضافات، يعني اذا يصير كلها ملل. مثلا ناقش الهايبوكراسي بالمجتمع بهاي تايم، ناقش التشينج اللي دا يصير بالهاي الاندستري تاون. زين دكتور and the struggle of the society، ولكن بعدين ايش خلق فد هوب، يعني لابد ان يكون هناك هوب في التغيير والكذا.
ودائما اذا تلاحظ يعني اكو something يعني also a characteristic about Dickens، دائما يعني يخفي الريليشنز بين اكو علاقات تصير هيدن بين الشخصيات. يعني مثلا الا في نهايه القصه يلا نعرف انه مثلا هذا الشخص كان ابو هاي الشخصيه، دائما يخفيها هاي الحاله. انا الشيء هذا نشوفه مثلا بالافلام الهنديه، ياكل ويشرب وياه العمر كله، بعدين يكتشف انه هذا اخوه. ياكل ويشرب وياه هاي البنيه ويحبها، وباللحظه الاخيره اللي تقوم من الزواج تطلع اخته.
واقع من التكتك دكتور.
بالضبط. تشارلز ديكنز يعني هسه مثلا انت هذا مستر هذا نسيت اسمه الو استاذ محمد مرحبا مستر هذا بوكني ورا وين صداقه طويله مع بيب وجمله يعني تفاعلات بين انتراكشنز بينه وبين بيب، وراها اكتشفنا انه هو هذا اللفر الفيانسي مال مسز هافيشام who deserted her at the day of marriage, at the day of their wedding. يعني هاي يعني كلش characteristic feature of Dickens، يعني صفة مميزة لديكنز انه دائما يخفي الترابط بين طبعا هذا كله يؤدي الى يعني اكو excitement يصير، اكو thrilling يصير عند القارئ، هاي الإثارة. من هو دائما يقول make them wait، يعني them على القراء مالته، ينصح هذا الولد الشاب اللي يريد يصير كاتب، يقول له أنا أنصحك من تكتب make your readers wait، do not tell everything at the beginning. وهذا فشي صحيح، يعني هو كان موهوب يعني لدرجة أنه يقعد يكتب بالقلم مالته، يرسمها، يسوي كاركتر سكتش للشخصية مالته ويصور لها تصور فد معين، بحيث يعني يبنيها بناء تام من الأي تو زد، وإلى أن تختمر الشخصية في باله، يخليها على ورق تطلع شخصية كلش تروق للذوق العام.
دكتور العفو، طبعا هذا نوع من الابداع. تدري ليش دكتور؟ راح يشد القارئ حتى يوصل للنهايه في الشخصيه، يعني النهايه مبهمه، والا اكو نوبات، اكو قراء يعني اذكياء راسا يتوقعوها، ولهذا شوف مسلسلات نوبات نشوفهن راسا نعوفهن لان نعرف نهايتها.
يعني حتى هسه يعني انا هسه من اتطرق الى ويليام ميكبيس ثاكري. يعني ثاكري كان very popular person و very popular novelist، لكن ما حقق النجاح المالي والشهرة اللي حققها ديكنز. ليش؟ لأن هو كان، احنا بمصطلحنا العراقي، كان يعني يقول له امشي ورا اللي يبكيك ولا تمشي ورا اللي يضحكك. الناس كانت تحب يمشون ورا واحد يضحكهم، وكان ثكري يبكيهم، فلذلك ما حقق الشهرة ولا النجاح ولا الأرباح اللي حققها تشارلز ديكنز.
ولهذا هو فن كتابة، فن الكتابة، هذا فن الكتابة والإبداع.
أستاذ سعد، تشارلز ديكنز كان يعني clever enough، يعني he was mixing between artistic creativity and business. فنجح نجاح باهر. يعني أنا شفت في الصور، طبعا أنا الحمد لله محظوظ إنه زرت البيت هذا اللي أقول لكم عليه، موجودة طبعا الصور مالته بالفيسبوك، موجودة باليوتيوب، بالجوجل. اكو خالين صور مثل هاي الصور اللي خالتها دكتورة فاطمة، البيت القديم اللي كان يسكن به ديكنز وعائلته. يعني بيت يمكن عبارة عن يمكن 3 في 3 أو 3 في 4 متر، بيت متواضع جدا، كربة نقدر نقول عليها. لكن من تقارن البيت اللي حاليا اللي مات به هو ديكنز، اللي عاش ومات به بعدين، راح تصير عندك تصور عن الطفرة النوعية اللي طفرها من الحضيض إلى القمة. يعني بيت فخم بكل، حتى في معاييرنا هسه الحالية تتصوره بيت فخم ويعكس ثراء الملاعق، الشوكات، السكاكين مصنوعة من الفضة، مثل ما قلت لكم الصحون مرسوم عليها صور الضيوف.
دكتور لمسة فنان.
طبعا عنده خدم وعنده ميد وعنده غرفة اللي يتريق بيها، غرفة يتعشى بيها، غرفة يكتب بيها. إلى حد الآن طبعا شيء كلش لطيف. كان عنده قلم وكان عنده ديسك، المكتب مالته اللي يكتب عليه، فمرات يكتب على الخشب بدلا من أن يكتب على الورق. إلى حد الآن الذكريات اللي كاتبها على الخشب محفورة موجودة على الميز مالته، حتى ملابس النوم مالته، حتى العفو تشامبر بوت مالته موجوده. تعرفون شنو تشامبر بوت؟ تشامبر بوت نعم نعم
تشامبر روم، هي تشامبر روم بس بوت
بي او تي. تشامبر بوت هو العفو يعني يعني need to mention this because at that time يعني اكو sanitation system، يعني هاي النظام الصرف الصحي العفو ماكو، يعني مجاري ماكو بالبيوت. فكانوا الناس العفو when they use toilets they use mobile toilet، يعني عبارة عن مرافق صحية متنقلة. هو عبارة عن يعني كرسي محفور يقعد عليه الشخص والعفو لقضاء الحاجة، وكان اكو خادم معين يتولى مهمة تنظيف هذا الكرسي. لهالدرجة موجودة كله إلى حد الآن، موجودة في بيت تشارلز ديكنز، بيت فخم في شارع ثري، شارع فخم في وسط لندن. يعني أعتقد هسه بالإضافة إلى قيمته العقارية تضاف إلى قيمته الأدبية أنه هذا بيت ديكنز يعني يمكن لا يقدر بثمن هذا البيت. قيمته كموقع، قيمته كشارع، وقيمته كملكيته لديكنز، يعني هذا يمكن لا يقدر بأي ثمن. بس مجرد
نعم عفوا نوبات بالخليج،
آلاف عيني
نوبات بالخليج رقم يشتروه بملايين، رقم ما سيارة. فكيف هذا كيف هذا البيت الاسطوره يعني مثل تصورات
استاذ سعد؟
نعم.
الكنيسه اللي مسح بيها ميسي دموعه عرضوها بالمزاد بمليون دولار.
فدكتور مقابل هذا اعمال ادبيه ويعني هيك كفنان كارث ادبي،
مخطوطه معينه هيك ورقه قصاصه صغيره لقوها كاتبها تنسن هذا الشاعر الاسطوره امير الشعراء. مخطوطه هاي انعرضت بالمزاد، اول سعر جابته سعر ابتدائي 4 مليون باوند بريطاني، ما يعادل 5 ملايين دولار امريكي. فهذا البيت مال تشارلز ديكنز موجود، وموجوده به حتى القضبان مال السجن هو اخذها. بعدين طبعا الحكومه البريطانيه قررت غلق هذا السجن مال المديونين وهدمته. فمن هدمته هو تقدم بطلب رسمي للحكومه البريطانيه واخذ القضبان مال هاي السجن واحتفظ بها وموجوده الى حد الان. يعني على مود يتذكر دائما terrible conditions which he and his father faced in that terrible place. وكان عنده طبعا يربي هو ريفن يعني غراب عاده غراب يعني غراب اليف، مو غراب وحشي، فيصيحوا له ريفن مو كرو. الكرو هو الغراب الوحشي. حتى هذا الغراب اللي كان مربيه ديكنز من مات حنطوه وبقوه بالبيت، دلاله على اهميته طبعا، ودلاله على انه يفتخرون به. يعني الدخول لهذا البيت ب $10 اتذكر، اي $10، والتجوال به طبعا فسنويا يمكن آلاف الزوار يدخلوا له. يعني حد الان بس هو مجرد البيت يمكن يربح اكثر من اكبر مصرف تجاري، يربح اكثر من اي مشروع تجاري، بس مجرد بيت هيك حاطين. سعد عواطف. Anything else, guys? I hope you enjoyed the lecture.
Yes, it was very interesting.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali. It was very interesting.
It is interesting. Yes, it is interesting. With ing, yes, it should be interesting because anything about Dickens should be interesting. Because he is one of the interesting literary figures in the history of the British literature, and he made a tremendous impact, a tremendous influence on the progress of the British fiction. And the one evidence about this is that we still nowadays enjoy reading Dickens, enjoy watching Dickens. and this everlasting influence, everlasting impact is another proof that Dickens was a fascinating person for broadcasting these lovely series of lectures. And this center, language center at the Ministry of Higher Education, is welcoming any person who would like to attend, whether online or in person, to attend the wide spectrum of activities done by Dr. Fatima and her lovely team. We welcome any attendance, we welcome any participations. We are available along the year, 30 days a month, 7 days a week. Activities even sometimes during day offs. We are available inshallah. Please familiarize yourselves with anything published or anything broadcasting through this center, and you are welcome to be with us in this center and to benefit from its various activities, which are all free of charge. You don't have to pay anything. It's free. It's just for improving your English. Anytime you are welcome.
Thank you. That is very kind for you.
You're welcome, Saad. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome, my friends. So I leave now the ground. Without further ado, and if no further questions are raised, I leave the ground now for my colleague, Dr. Fatima, to say some goodbye words to you. Thank you and take care of yourselves.
Thank you, Dr. Ali, for this amazing lecture. Although we've taken 2 hours of your precious time, but I think the attendees, they enjoyed the lecture very much. And thank you for the nice words about the center. I hope that people will attend more next time. And guys, I'll post again the link to the attendance sheet. Fill out the form if you missed it. And then that's it.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
You're welcome. This time will be a certification of attendance. حيكون بس تأييد حضور. Yes. For the lectures, yes. والله حسوي لهم عادتهم قليل. Okay. So guys, for the attendance certificates, you know that the general director or general manager of our directorate is busy most of the time. So it will take about 2 weeks in order for me to finish everything, sign the papers, and then you will find them ready in the center. Any lecture that will be here in the center, you will get a certificate of attendance. But for the general sessions, you will get just the certification. يعني اللي هو بس تأييد حضور. أي يعني المحاضرات تحصلون عليها شهادة حضور وتأييد حضور.
شلون نتصل عليها؟
هي راح اخليها لي اسويها على الفيسبوك، واذا مخليني الايميل مالتكم ايضا راح تزبطوني.
موجود، احنا دزينا عليه بلا زحمه عليك دكتوره، دزينا عليه هذا شاركنا به بالاجتماع الايميل مالنا، بكت عليه الدزين بلا زحمه عليك.
ايه هو على الايميل الموجود.
عفوا استاذ سعد عزيزي.
نعم.
احنا طبعا احنا هاي يعني احنا كنا طبعا يعني موجوده على طول السنه هاي الاكتيفيتيز، فاحنا مو شرط اونلاين يعني.
أوكي.
حتى موجوده حضوريا. اذا تحبون تشاركون بها، احنا نجمع لكم هاي شهادات المشاركه. طبعا شهادات موثقه من قبل الوزاره، موقعه من قبل المدير العام لاداره البعثات والعلاقات الثقافيه. انا انصحكم حقيقه تجون، يعني الجو كلش مرح.
دكتور تعرفنا احنا طلابك، نجي باي وقت، بس ان شاء الله استونا خلصنا من معركه مال كورونا والامتحانات ان شاء الله. بس التبليغ دكتور بلكت على التبليغات تكون تنزل اي والله.
اي احنا بعد استاذ سعد اكو هوايه نشاطات ونشاطات حلوه، طبعا نشاطات فني ايضا يعني بيها جانب ممتع وبيها جانب تعليمي.
أكيد.
يعني
أكيد.
احنا نلتمس لحد الان تجينا الفيدباك من المشاركين، الفيدباك كلش ايجابي، والدليل انه دائما يرجعون يعني نفس المشاركين يرجعون للمركز، يحبون طبيعه الدورات اللي نعطيها لهم. فلذلك اذا تجون يعني ستجدوا لدينا خيرا كثيرا ان شاء الله. شهادات مشاركه، طبعا التي اند كوفي فاسيلتيز will be provided، بسكوت will be provided، طبعا بوب كورن
حيكون يعني خصيصا لعرض الافلام. next time we'll have a play by Shakespeare.
نعم.
فهاي شهريا احتمال اسويها انه عرض فيلم او يعني one of the writings, the products of English writers.
يعني سعد يعني those people who are seeking to improve their English, this is the right place and right time for them. Come to us and you will find come to us and you will get your خاصة هذول اللي ما يريدون ينسون الإنجليزية مالتهم بعد التخرج. يعني اكو ناس يقول لك انا ادرس على قد التخرج، لا، اللي ناس تحب تطور انجليزيتها هذا مكانهم الصحيح.
اكيد دكتور. هو شنو الدكتور ياخذ الشهاده وانتهى؟ يعني هو بالعكس يبدا العمل.
هلا بيكم اني تايم
دكتور. باي وقت لو مع بدايه السنه الجديده؟
احنا اكو طبعا تقام الدورات دوريا يعني كل فتره، يعني تقريبا هسه دكتوره فاطمه يعني بالاسبوع تقريبا يمكن 2 3 اي شيء بالاسبوع، قد 2 أو 3 فعاليات عندنا
بالتقويم الجامعي، لانه احنا دوامنا يومي بالوزاره، فالدورات مستمره لكن شنو يعني حسب جدولنا هنا.
وعي فيها طبعا حريه الاختيار للطالب، يعني اللي مثلا حتى المحاضره اللي نسويها حضوريا نبثها اونلاين، يعني اللي ما يقدرون يجون يقدرون هم يشاركون، بس اللي يجون هنا حقيقه خصوصا انا سمعت من بعض الطلاب من بعض الناس انه يقول لك يابا انا اريد اكسر حاجز الخوف، اريد اكسر هذا حاجز التردد بالتكلم، راح يجي هنا يلقى ناس مثله، يعني ناس هم يخافون، ناس هم عندهم هذا الحاجز. من انت تشوف واحد مثلك حتى تطبق نظريه الكاثارسيس استاذ سعد.
نعم دكتور.
هذا البيتي اند فير راح تتخلصون من عنده، وتشوف اكو ناس مثلك او مثل زيد او مثل عمرو او مثل سين او مثل خالد،
وبرعايتكم اكيد راح يصير تطور.
اهلا وسهلا بكم، اهلا وسهلا بكم، واني تايم يعني
ان شاء الله. دكتور اكو جدول ينزل جدول دكتور مثلا بالفعاليات؟
اي نعم.
مثلا
اذا تتابع صفحه الفيسبوك انا كل شيء انزل هناك، يعني ننزل ahead of time، وبعدين تذكير همينه قبل يوم، وبنفس اليوم قبل ساعتين همينه ادز تذكير، فخليك متابع صفحه الفيس، راح كل شيء راح تلقاه هناك.
اكيد. هي مقدمه استاذنا احنا دائما نتابع. نعم
استاذ سعد والاخوه والاخوات الحاضرين.
نعم.
طبعا دكتوره فاطمه عندها زملاء من امريكا، عندها زملاء من دول اخرى هم يشاركون بالنشاطات مالتنا، فانتم اذا تحتكون ويا هيك نماذج طبعا ايضا يعني هذا راح يعطيكم فد اضافه نوعيه اكثر بعد.
اكيد دكتور اكيد.
هلا بكم واهلا وسهلا بكم اي وقت.
اكيد. الله يحفظك دكتور.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور. شكرا جزيلا دكتوره فاطمه.
شكرا لحضوركم، شكرا لكم.
واللي ما سجل خليه يسجل حضور. and that's it. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.